political, polarized media says about candidates. So that's what he really said about going to North Korea first. Concerning that, I think it's safe to say that even Mr. Moon realizes that we must, and he has said publicly that we must respect international agreements. And that I have said that there is no way that we Koreans will be buckling under Chinese economic pressure. And oh, by the way, it seems once that does deploy to the Korean Peninsula, the Chinese will have threatened privately and openly that they will conduct severe economic pressure to Korea. That a new definition of Korea-Chinese relations will begin. I think as an alliance and to America, America needs to really think about, is it really in U.S. best interest if the Chinese and the Koreans are at their throats like 50 years ago? So that's another looming question that we need to think about. So concerning that, I think there should be no doubt that we will deploy the THAAD battery to South Korea. But there are things that we need to talk about. For instance, one battery of THAAD is not going to cover all of Korea. We're going to need more THAAD, or maybe another type of missile system. And the whole process of that coming to Korea in the first place did not have the kind of consensus that most Americans believe that there exists in South Korea. So those are the kind of things that I think we need to talk about. Kaesong and Afghan transition, all of these issues I am sure that we will be talking as allies. We will have a consensus between our two countries, and we will move along like shoulder to shoulder, as you said, in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike, do you entertain these stuff?
Sure. Thank you for excellent comments. This is an honor. Thank you for excellent responses, and it's an honor to be among people who actually are real experts on this region and done so much for its security over the years. I'm not going to try to respond in each case. I actually thought that the sum total of all the comments was enriching, and even where people were partly disagreeing with me, I think that was actually healthy to sort of broaden the possible interpretations of different issues. For example, with Joe's point about how we should be seriously concerned about China's behavior in the South China Sea, I do agree with him, and I'm glad he emphasized that point. If you literally look at what China said and what it's trying to impose, it's pretty scary stuff. It's not good. I guess what I'm saying is I'm relatively confident that our policy responses are working pretty well. But Joe raises a very good specific point about whether we have been mistaken to use the innocent passage. So, as I think most of you know, I'm not an expert on this kind of international law, but if you just go quietly within would-be territorial waters and you make sure you're just, sailing in a straight line, that is implying that you recognize that another country has ownership of that territory, and therefore these are territorial waters, and therefore you have to sort of behave yourself and quietly get through as quickly as you can, even if it's international waterways that you need access to. Joe raises the very valid point that if we're disputing the very fact that these islands can be owned by anybody at all, as the Hague Permanent Tribunal underscored, maybe they shouldn't be viewed that way. Then maybe we need to do something more than just innocent passage. I guess my instinct would be to think this through, to take up Joe's good point and challenge, but ask maybe, can we do this with a relatively small vessel and some kind of a military maneuver that is not about, or couldn't be interpreted as gearing up for combat with China, but was still a military maneuver. Could even involve a Coast Guard ship. Could even involve humanitarian response. Maybe there are ways to do it to prove the principle, but also send a message that you're trying not to require China to make a response, that you're trying to still keep this thing under wraps. That's sort of my instinct about how to take that conversation to the next option or set of options. And then just one more point on THAAD. I guess, again, I'm with the general, but Larry raises the valid point. Well, What if the possible future president of the ROK won't allow it? And, you know, if I were in government, I'd just say that's too many hypotheticals to have to respond to. But since I'm not in government, I will take up his challenge. And I would want to try 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times to restore the case for THAAD, even with a new president who came into office saying he didn't want it. Because I think it is the best response to a very valid threat. And the more we start thinking of this as something that's, you know, a bargaining chip in our conversation with China, the more we get into difficult terrain. We really don't want to even acknowledge that our view about that has anything to do with our relationship with China. It could be Canada or France right there, and we would still want to deploy that. Because the point is, this is against a North Korean threat that is acute and growing. So I don't really want to entertain the conversation that suggests that what we're doing is somehow in any way related to our broader relationship with China. Recognizing the Chinese are going to be upset, but hoping that over time they will recognize we're doing this as a matter of principle. They may not like it, they may disagree with it, they may not fully understand it at first, but I would try multiple times with a new South Korean president to make the case for THAAD, even if the new president didn't initially want it. And then if we wind up still not succeeding with that argument, then sure, then you have to think more about Patriots. You got to have a lot of batteries all over the ROK because Patriots' range is so limited, and it's really not a good substitute for THAAD because it's a terminal defense, and you want multiple layers of defense, not just one. That's what you have to try to do. But much better to make the case for THAAD. One last thing I'll say, we haven't had a broader discussion here, maybe you will later on today, I think, about the six-party process and overall negotiating strategies towards the DPRK. I do think we should have a full discussion about what kinds of strategies we might employ in negotiations with North Korea. And I think some of the old strategies need to be rethought. I'll just leave that as a simple point for now, knowing that you're coming back to it later. But as long as North Korea has a growing missile and nuclear capability, we need to respond. We need military countermeasures and defenses, and there should be no apology about that towards China or anybody else.
Thank you, Mike. In the interest of time, I'll open to the floor just one or two quick questions. Paul, quickly.
The question of that can be replaced by ICAS, of course, and that's just a question of putting a more defensive system and nailing it to the Korean Peninsula. The mission can still be accomplished on the far right parts. Second of all, on safe passage, it's between 12 nautical miles and 200 nautical miles. If the ship is going to do this exploration, it's supposedly okay, but if it in fact is looking for economic resources while it's doing statistics survey, or looking for submarine hydrophones coming off the Chinese base, the Chinese can challenge the ones that are safe passage.
Maybe I'll take the first and let Joe take the second if you want, but that's okay. But on ICAS is going to have the same issues as that. I mean, if the Chinese are worried about, to the extent the Chinese have any kind of a valid worry, and that we might be in the same situation ourselves, it's about the radar. It's about the ability of an advanced U.S. radar based on the peninsula to peer into China and see missiles that might be launched from there, and especially from northeastern China. And so I don't think an ICAS option solves that. In other words, we could expect the Chinese to object to that too. Now, your idea is great if we can somehow persuade the Chinese not to object. But the bottom line is I think we have to do this regardless of what the Chinese say, provided it doesn't put Seoul in an unnecessarily difficult place. I would hope that in the end the Chinese will recognize we're just going to do this. The alliance is going to do this whether they like it or not because we have to protect ourselves. And we've all failed, and they failed too, to address the North Korean threat in any kind of non-military way. So we're going to need to have better military responses. I would just do it and take the fallout, take the fallout of the U.S.-China relationship. I think they'll get over it.
Thank you. Joe?
Yeah, Paul, your point is well taken regarding the 12-mile territorial waters and the 200-mile economic exclusive zone. But if we don't recognize the original territorial claim of China that eliminates both high seas, and therefore we can do whatever we normally do on the high seas.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah.
Where's the microphone? Yes.
Hi. As I understand South China Sea issue, the elephant in the room, so to speak, is the 9-dash line and its legitimacy. If we assume that the 9-dash line is legitimate, which is equivalent to the United States claiming the Gulf of Mexico, then everything else falls apart for us. These are no longer international waters. But if we reject the legitimacy, then everything falls apart. You're talking about a couple of specks here and there. There's a philosophical difference between the way Westerners and Asians approach such matters. For us, silence implies consent. If we don't enforce our rights in these international waters, then we accept China's position and we recognize their claim. Comments?
I'll say one thing. Bill Brown may want to say something else. Others may as well. Very simply, I think there is no way the United States is going to recognize the 9-dash line as drawing a literal territorial sea equivalent for China. We're sailing through those waters all the time. And a third of the world's maritime commerce goes through those waters, making no port calls or requests for permission to China. So I think that's just off the table. I think the only, China has this notion, my understanding, others can correct or add or disagree, my understanding is that China, even in a more maximal interpretation of their own view of what's a pragmatic goal for that 9-dash line, they love to, over time, push us out of our ability to operate the military capability in that zone. And they probably like to have first dibs on seabed resources, be at least the first among equals in development of economic resources within that whole area. Beyond that, I don't know that they even have a literal aspiration. I mean, they leave aside the rhetorical position. The aspiration to have that treated as a territorial body of water in the PRC is just off the table as far as I'm concerned.
Bill?
Yeah, I don't think the Chinese claim that anyway. The 9-dash line, what you say, kind of, is that any rocks or islands within that is theirs, not the sea, the rocks. That's a big difference. They've never complained about navigation. The issue of freedom of navigation has never been an issue. That's, they would kill themselves by trying to stop that. I think a lot of this is just a red herring. The U.S. for many, many years, as my understanding, was brutally neutral on who owns those lines. We said, it's not us to decide, it's you all to decide. We're not going to agree or disagree with Chinese or Philippine or anybody's claims. That's my view. We should stick to that.
Thank you, Bill. In the interest of time, that this segment is over with Mike. Thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you all.
And Mike, this is our ritual.
Oh, very kind.
This is one. And also, next time when you play the golf or tennis, it goes with you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's pretty good. Pretty good. It's good living.
Next speaker is Tom Greco. Next, coming out, introduce Tom. By the way, is your slides ready?
I'm told that there's technical difficulties, so I'll just go without them.
Well, we unite on the United States Senate.
Thank you, Dr. Kim, for this unique opportunity to introduce our second speaker today, Dr. Tom Carrico, in this history-laden chamber of the Caucus Room of the United States Senate. Dr. Thomas Carrico, newly minted ICAS Fellow, is a senior fellow with the International Security Program, director of the Missile Defense Project of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Tom arrived in 2014 as a fellow of the Project on Nuclear Issues. His His research focuses on national security, U.S. nuclear forces, missile defense, and public law. Since 2009, Tom was an assistant professor of political science, director of the Center for the Study of American Democracy at Kenyon College. From 2010 to 2011, he was selected to be an American Political Science Association Congressional Fellow, where he worked with the House Armed Services Committee on U.S. Strategic Forces Policy, Non-Proliferation, and NATO. Tom received his PhD in Politics and Policy from Claremont Graduate University and his bachelor's from the University of Dallas. He taught national security policy, American government, and constitutional law at Claremont McKenna College and California State University in San Bernardino. Tom has written an executive congressional relations, The Thoughts of Niccolo Machiavelli, and international executive agreements. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Tom Carrico.
Well, thank you. Pleased to be here. Delighted and honored for the invitation. Thank you very much, Mr. Kim. Also very pleased to be an ICAS fellow. Thank you for that as well. So I apologize. Unfortunately, my slides aren't working, but we can just talk through this without it. That'll work just fine. Mr. Kim asked me to kind of talk about missile defense broadly for the Trump administration. And so obviously I think we're going to talk about the Korean Peninsula issues and THAAD in particular, but really I'll take a broader view to come at this. So one of the first things just to note, and I think it's one of the reasons we heard THAAD coming up so much in the first presentation,